All right, so thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. As everybody can see, excuse me, in your background, you've been all over the place with respect to football. So for those that don't know, where have you been? And then since you've last been on any of these episodes with Kier, you've got a new job. So kind of fill everybody in on where you've been with your journey in strength and conditioning.
Yeah, so I started in the college setting at Kansas State, a couple years while I was a graduate teacher working with the men's basketball team there. From there, about 3 years at Michigan State, and then 3 years at the University of Oregon. And my most recent full-time team venture was with the New York Giants for almost 4 years, and then decided to somewhat step away, transition, and try to figure things out. And right now, well, I'll back up to last year. So 2021 was a massive year in terms of experiencing any and everything from, almost being completely bankrupt financially to basically getting myself out of that and becoming a little bit more financially stable. Some interesting things that had happened there, creating a consulting company and then a one-on-one coaching company, which ended up doing really well in the back end of last year, which transitioned to the beginning of this year, all without ever setting up a website. So everything was specifically through social media, through relationships and connections that I had built over the past 10, 12 years, and getting a chance to leverage that. Realized that I still liked being in the sports space, but didn't necessarily want to spend that much time with the consulting and then all the one-on-ones with athletes and clients and entrepreneurs that I was working with. So much to the extent that I was kind of just burnt out on that, spent too much time dealing with other people's problems while pushing mine off to the side, to where getting out of the team setting last year, it all brought everything up to my reality. So everything that I pushed off to the side by putting the team first was now something I had to deal with in terms of myself, relationships, family, friends, money. And luckily just have been keeping myself afloat. Things were doing well with that consulting space, but then through some interesting connections that I had made through Twitter, getting introduced to a lot of people in the startup, the VC space, a couple of my one-on-one clients are, 7, 8, 9 figure people that are really well connected, that are very smart. So learning a lot about the tech area, the software area, what really would excite me with the new opportunity, because, I haven't 100% closed the door on team sport. It's more, I would like the opportunity to provide a lot of value with a specific role. And if it's out there, then I'm willing to talk with teams. So I actually had some interviews with some pro teams. This is all within the past few months with a few colleges. And as you know, like, people just still don't know what the fuck they're doing. And I'm legitimately in these.
That's one of the questions that I got for you later. So we'll get to
that. I'm in these conversations with a performance director or a GM or an AD. And I'm like, you guys have no clue what you want. You have the money, you have the means, but you are just throwing darts at a dartboard blindly, and whatever sticks, you're just going with it. And you're paying somebody, whatever the position is, $40,000 to $300,000, and you're not getting much value. You just feel like this is the right person for you. And a lot of these teams, a lot of these orgs just don't know how to do their hiring or what they should be looking for, because they're trying to copy what somebody else is doing. They're trying to listen to a new hire, whether it's a coach, whether it's administrator, somebody high up, like, hey, oh, we need this because somebody else has it, or I've seen it done this way, so this is the type of person we need. And, as you know, this high performance model can be a really great model, but it's not really done very well here in the States. And most of the teams that are trying to apply it are just completely failing, because you just don't have everybody on board. You have staff that are there for 5, 10, 20 years, and then you bring in somebody new to oversee it all. It's like, that's not how this is actually going to work. So I was connected to a CEO of a biosensor company. She reached out to me just to have an initial conversation, because it's a 10-person outfit. We're hiring for an 11th, but it's something that's been in develop for 6 years. She's been doing a lot of VC funding for multiple projects in the health and tech space. So she knows exactly what she's doing. So when we were talking, we hit it off instantly. Like, I really liked her. I liked what she had to say. I liked the product. I wanted to get my hands on it. I want to learn more about it. I wanted to meet the people that are on staff right now, because you've got an actual engineer, you've got a data science engineer, you have a PhD physiologist. So this isn't some kind of willy-nilly GoFundMe outfit or, help fundraise a product. Like, this is something that's serious and in development for a while, and we're hopefully going to launch to market within the next 6 to 8 weeks, which is the goal. And my goal now is, after speaking with everybody, with figuring out where I might potentially add value to this company, where they wanted to hire an exercise physiologist, somebody with a master's in kin who knows about the scientific process. But the goal would be to try to integrate this sensor in the team setting. And then they had an idea of what they wanted, but she didn't know somebody like me might have been interested. So we got connected, and I gave her a spiel. Like, this is my background. This is what I've been doing since I left, coaching. These are the different things that I'm really interested in. And, she's like, oh my God, well, like, this is what we have available. Let's talk. So the more we started talking, the more it's like, okay, we can actually define this role based on what you bring to the table as opposed to what they were looking for.
So did you kind of change it because of your expertise? Like, they were going one way and you kind of helped them go in a better direction?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It's kind of a little bit on both. Like, this is what they were looking for. This is what I can do. I can fill that role, but this is really where my talents shine.
Yeah.
And I can help you integrate in all these different areas. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And I kind of post about this stuff online is, why would you hire just to fill a position when you can have somebody that can fill the position, but do so much more and tell you exactly what they can do within the confines of, not overstepping bounds and trying to do too much. And that's what actually happened in this case. So, they had a salary range for that exercise physiology position, but I was like, well, this is kind of what it would take for me to get on board, knowing that, it's a startup. They don't have D1 football money, but at the same time, they matched my range, and I couldn't even believe it. But I was like, okay, this is definitely something that they're serious about. I'm serious about it. And, so I've been working with the company since June 20th, and things have been going really well. Made a couple trips up to Boston, going to be moving there full time.
Fucking right. You see that in the background right there, Boston. Start taking the T, start fucking taking, going Fenway. You're welcome.
Look, I'll go, I'll just be just a casual sports fan. I have no allegiances right now to sports teams outside of the people that I know, the coaches that I know and respect, and the players that I've worked with. So in terms of my fandom, I'm a free agent.
Are you allowed to say if this was with Quorum?
No.
Okay.
So obviously Eric and I connected. So Eric Quorum and I connected I think it was
because I've seen you on a couple of his blueprints, right? And
yeah. So we've recorded a ton initially here in my room. And then I actually went down and visited my folks in Pearland, and he lives, right outside of Houston, and he had been doing some recording in Austin. So we actually met up in Austin over, 6 to 8 hours one day and just hammered out like 10 different podcasts. So I think we've probably done about 12 to 15, like the snippet one. So 10 minutes each, just trying to provide a good amount of information to, maybe clarify a subject or get people to think about something in a different way. But I think what Eric's doing is awesome, but it was more so just a continuation of the things that I had already been doing.
He's sort of invested in you in like Bitcoin type. So he'll have the 10 or 12 and he'll just like drip feed them as you get more famous and whatnot. So those would be worth more. I'll just hold him in. So Pratik keeps projecting his career. I wanted to jump in with a bit of context thinking. And this is, asking for your personal opinion, because some of the things you say about the way the industry's going and the way people pick and make decisions sounds to me that it's sometimes common in new processes. So people start seeing that rivals do something similar, or the next door neighbor metaphor, and you don't know exactly what's going on, but you sort of feel like, the FOMO, and then you sort of explore because the stuff you don't know, you can't know what you don't know. So there is a bit of exploration that sometimes for people that may be ahead of the game or maybe smarter or whatever you want to put it, they are just lost. But how much of it do you reckon is, they're just like sort of shooting without a target, and how much of it is typical of a classical, strong culture, traditional sport trying to evolve,
I think more of it's the former of what you mentioned. Everything we look at today is an arms race, whether you're looking at collegiate or amateur sport or going to the professional sport, because it's all about optics and drawing in the crowd that you're trying to get in, whether it's the recruits from college, because as we know, the higher recruiting class you have, that's equated to having more wins. So you do any and everything, you spend as much as you can to get those kids in the door, because they are more talented players, and there's no doubt about it. You don't have a team have a lot of success, win double-digit games, and get a chance to go to the college football playoff if they generally don't have a top 10 or 15 recruiting class. And as we see in the college sense, there's been the only 8, 9 teams that have made the college football playoff since its inception. I was fortunate enough to be on one of those teams, win one of those games, but it's the same teams that are going every single year. So part of it is you do what everybody else is doing, but also you try to find an edge. Now, whether it's, hey, we just want to test something out to see if it's going to provide us with an advantage and it's valuable. That's where the latter part of what you said is we want to continue to evolve with a strong culture, understanding we might have some areas of opportunities within a specific area. And it's not limited to the performance of athletes. It could be recruiting and scouting or managing money and funds, what have you. But for the majority of my experience and conversations with coaches and practitioners all over the world, it's people are doing things because they don't want to be left out. So the FOMO kicks in, and the integration of a lot of the sports sciences without actual knowledge of are we asking the right questions, and do these applications help us get closer to having answers for those questions instead of, we need to monitor our athletes with Catapult. Well, look, a lot of these coaches don't give two shits about what the data says. And I've mentioned this before, if they want to bury the athletes, they are. There are places that do it very well, and they have coaches that buy in. You've got one of those teams right there. That
was a relief when I went there. Listening to
having a chance to talk with the coaches on that staff and the practitioners, saying like, look, Coach Kelly values our input and knows that Alabama and Georgia are the top dogs in the SEC. We know this. They have the best players every single year. But if you want to compete, you not only have to get a good quality caliber of player, but you have to be smarter than them if you can get an advantage in all these different areas. So I think that's just one of the biggest detriments is teams introducing things too fast. And I was guilty of it too. When I was at Oregon, I had carte blanche to do any and everything that I really wanted to within the confines of my department, because the only thing I had to answer to was my bottom line. As long as I didn't go over on budget, then I could try a bunch of different things out. Now, some things were intentional and targeted and had meaning. With some things I kind of just went shotgun because I heard somebody else doing it, or this team across the pond was doing it, or this professional team was doing it, and I didn't want to miss that opportunity to. So that was one of those live and learn moments, but that was 8 years ago. And now it's being a lot more intentional about, we don't need all these fancy gadgets, we don't need to do everything. We need smarter practitioners that understand how to relate to athletes, because at the end of the day, if your athletes don't understand, don't care about it, or don't do it, it doesn't matter how fancy.
That's something that it seems like you've done a great job of, right? Because there's that post of, who was it? One of the DBs was like, hey, let me get them Skittle, right? Like,
yeah,
he went to you right away, like had a good relationship with you. And it's been something that you don't only just talk about, you can literally see it on social media. What are some of the things that are actually worth buying that's not just keeping up with the Joneses, in your opinion? Like, you see people trying to buy a DEXA scan, or people trying to buy body weight scales that can tell you how much body weight fat you have. Like, what's actually legit, and what do you, again, just think is keeping up with the Joneses?
Yeah, I think from a health and performance perspective, you kind of want to just branch everything out and understand, like, what are the different areas that are important to the health and performance of an athlete? What is it that we can test and assess, and how can we monitor that and apply these interventions? So obviously body comp's a big one. There's no doubt body comp weight. You want to make sure that you have appropriate methods of doing so. And, there's definitely nothing wrong with the DEXA, but at the same time, it's an expensive machine. It has to have the specific space and equipment. In some states, you have to go through a course. Like, we were in Oregon, we had to go through a multi-day course that had nothing to do with body comp, but had everything to do with X-ray testing, because that was what the state's requirements were. In Jersey, where the Giants training center is, we thought about a DEXA, but at the same time, you had to go through a 2-year course that was the equivalent of about, I can't remember, $10,000 to $20,000 to be able to sit for this exam. And I'm like, well, what if I get fired? Start all over.
Yeah.
With somebody else. So from like a body comp perspective, DEXA is great. I will always be a fan of Skinfold. So if you have an ISAC certification, there's so much you can get from that a DEXA, a bod pod, a BIA, a SICA, an InBody is not going to be able to give you. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I think a lot of places and a lot of practitioners don't understand. It's we compartmentalize and put all of our athletes into, they have to be in these body fat percentage ranges without understanding, like, this is the actual physical genetic makeup of this dude or female. and this is where they are, this is where they potentially could be, and this is what's best for them, as opposed to, hey, all of our receivers have to be single digit body fat, all of our linemen have to be 20 to 23% body fat. And it's like, look, some of the best players I've ever had a chance to work with and coach in college and pro had horrible body comps. So it's weighing the pros and cons with that. And then even something as simple as measuring, resting metabolic rate. You could get a Parvomedics, a core review, and really get an insight into how is this person metabolizing, his carbs and protein, and what can we do to calculate energy expenditure instead of just generic equations. I'll always be a fan of trying to figure out how to monitor internal stress. So yeah, Catapult external load monitoring is great, but it's only one piece of the equation, and you're using data that other teams have utilized, the standards that they've utilized with their athletes. Their practices are run different. The way that they train is different. So to an extent, it's not the best thing in the world if you're trying to compare apples to oranges. Now, you also know that athletes are going to adapt to stress in a variety of different ways. And it's not always just the physical stress that really buries them. It's once you get to know your athletes, the things that are going on in their life, why we have this big issue with mental health is they don't know how to cope with all the other stress outside of training and outside of the weight room. So emotionally, like, how are they doing? Mentally, like, are they bogged down by school? Spiritually, where are they at on the depth chart? Or how are they getting along with their coaches? Do they feel like they're actually contributing to the team? Are they going out and drinking? Those things have so much more of an impact on their ability and their HRV than just, what the physical day in and day out is going to be, because they can handle that. They're athletes. They're at this level for a reason. So whether it's using something like HRV for training, which is not an inexpensive option at all. If everybody has an iPhone, which everybody does, you can monitor that first thing in the morning. Or a lot of these conferences are now signing on deals with Whoop. Now, whether it's the most valid way to do so or not, at least it kind of opens the door to ask questions and have dialogue with your athletes when you understand, like, oh, this female athlete or this male athlete's HRV is going down significantly over the past 5 days. Why is that when, we've had 2 recovery days within that? And it's like, well, there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, even though physically their outputs are where they need to be on the field. Like, so and the studies too that show decreases in HRV are going to increase the risk for an injury, soft tissue injury. So I think there's a variety of different things that we can bring to the table that aren't going to break the bank, but there has to be a method behind it, and being able to utilize that knowledge and being intentional with it, to not be data driven, but data informed, to now have conversations with your athletes, to be very intentional about what our process is in the off season leading into competition, back to the off season leading into competition, and then getting a chance to evaluate all of it constantly. And I think those are things that a lot of teams are really missing the mark on.
And that's something that you have talked about before with respect to the skin calipers, right? And you had that equation where you were looking at their wingspan and how high their torso is, because again, everybody's not the exact same. And you had a couple of examples where, certain linemen weren't as big and their entire upper body is where they carried all that body weight. How would you recommend strength coaches going about talking with their coaches, talking with their high performance managers about these things if they're not as well versed as you in those things? How can they go about figuring that stuff out?
Yeah, I think it's worth getting a chance to, if it's something that they're looking seriously into doing, getting ISAC certified, generally with the level 2 or 3, you're going to have all that knowledge of knowing about the 5-way fractionation, understanding the limitations that some athletes are going to have with putting on mass based on their kinanthropometry and their anthropometrics, where that mass is going to be skewed, which is a big deal. Because
how about any of the guys that, like, the guys that put too much weight on, like you've talked about, where they're like, hey, they're a tight end, they become a tackle, and trying to, again, separate the skin fold from how, that arm or whatever is just so big to try to be able to get that skin caliper on it. I've seen coaches try to get it before, and it's just like, there's no way that was correct.
Yeah, a lot of them are dense. And I think the more experience, exposure you have to it, getting the sites done properly. And sometimes it could be just having them lay flat on their back too. If standing vertically, you can't pull away appropriately, just having them lie supine and then being able to take the measurement from at the appropriate spot. to be able to do that. And if you're doing it in the same spot every single time, ideally you would hope that the accuracy is there to help out with the appropriate equations when you put it all together.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a really valid tool. It definitely changed the way I started thinking about working with the players when I was in the league at the tail end of it. But at the same time, they really weren't going to make wholesale changes. You know, a lot of them were in their mid-20s, later 20s. You could try to do as much as we could with the rookies, but the time frame we have with them is so minimal that, you know, this type of methodology and thinking is better off with younger athletes, collegiate athletes, because they're still developing. There's still that opportune time to really say, like, okay, we know what his skeletal size is. You know, this guy is 6'4" versus this guy is 6'4". One has a ton of skeletal mass, so he's going to be able to carry a good amount of weight on him. He potentially could go tight end to tackle. And then another one, 6'4", man, he has a very, very small frame. You can put weight on him to maximize what he could potentially hold, but anything on top of that, you're going to be, if you want more weight on him, it's going to end up being fat, because everybody's going to have an upper limit with how much mass you can put on legally without going to, you know, performance enhancing drugs.
Your positions that you had at both Oregon and then the Giants, they were pretty unique. Do you think that, you know, looking back, the first one was almost like 8-9 years ago. Do you think in 8 or 9 years, you're going to see more of those positions in our field evolving? How do you, I know you can't predict it, but, you know, in your opinion of taking the step back and all the different consulting and all the people reaching out to you, do you start to project that being more of the norm, you know, whether it is college or the professional?
I think so. You know, we're seeing a lot of it happen just recently. And I think it depends on the professional league you work in. Like in the NBA, everybody's a, you know, DPT, strength coach, ATC with the CSCS.
Now, do you think that they're doing too many things at once and they can't do it well, or are they going to actually just be able to add to the staff so people are doing it well and helping each other out?
I think it depends on how they really devise the labor. So obviously we've got very big rocks that need to be checked off, you know, and from in terms of strength and conditioning, you need somebody who's going to be able to program for everybody. You need somebody who's going to be able to assist and handle rehabs. If it's in the college setting, then, you know, speed development is obviously going to be an important part. But then you also have who's going to be monitoring workloads, who's really good at that, because a lot of these things are full-time jobs in and of itself. And then everybody comes together during, you know, lift times, during training times to be able to, you know, help monitor, help observe, coach the athletes the way that they need to, depending on the sport. You need to have somebody who's overseeing the nutrition, hydration, supplementation, potentially, you know, recovery, what kind of testing assessments that you're doing. And then all the collaboration still needs to happen with the medical staff, because again, they have similar things that I've worked at the different places that I've been. You know, you have your head athletic trainer or the person in charge of sports medicine, whether it's a physician or somebody that's consulting or contracted to be able to be in that role. But then you also have, you know, your ATC DPTs that are involved in rehab and return to play. You have somebody who's involved mainly with, you know, concussions and TBIs. Then you have somebody who's kind of like your day-to-day, maybe a younger trainer who just kind of just fixes all the stuff that goes wrong. So I think the way that everything's evolving is you don't have to have 40 different hats on, but you have to really understand all the different areas that are impacted with health and performance. Because if you can't have those conversations amongst each other, then that's what's going to continue to silo everybody, because everybody's just going to have that hard head. This is my way. They don't understand the way that I see things. And it's just going to continue to provide friction instead of, hey, what's actually best for the athlete, instead of us putting our egos in the ring. It's like, let's take it off aside. Where should the situational roles be, and who's going to be, you know, when an injury happens or at this time of year, who's going to be able to speak first? And then, all right, what information we need from the next person, what information we need from the next person. Okay, now everybody understands what's going on. So there's clear orders, and then everybody understands, you know, who to go to if there's an issue. I think that's where a lot of practitioners and coaches will be able to continue to evolve, because just how, you know, strength coaches were seen as just the guys in the weight room a decade ago, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago. Now you have strength coaches that are directors of high performance that, you know, somewhat again, titles don't necessarily mean anything. It doesn't advocate for a person's full complement of skill set, but the more that you can be knowledgeable. So if a strength coach knows about, you know, rehab and return to play, they know a good amount of nutrition, they know how to program in the weight room, outside of the weight room, then that's somebody who's pretty dangerous in terms of adding a lot of value, as opposed to I learned under this D1 person, it was all about everything in the weight room. But the way I look at nutrition is, powerlifting type shit, super clean eating, and not understanding like, hey, this is what the athletes are actually really doing. This is what nutrition periodization means based on the bioenergetic demands of what they're going through over the course of the entire year. And this is how I can communicate it to them to get them interested, instead of going to Chick-fil-A and eating, Wingstop 6 nights a week, and just, getting by with that because they're young and they're freaky athletes.
What would you say, without calling any specific teams out, or not stepping on anybody's toes and not giving away any of your stuff for free, but what would you say is some of the biggest problems in the team sports setting with respect to nutrition or anything that you just talked about?
I think the difficulty is that the practitioners that are getting hired, they haven't had a lot of exposure in running a program or being very integrated in understanding, like, this is what, let's say football, this is what a football team does and goes through over the course of the entire year. This is what training looks like. These are the desired training adaptations. This is player behavior. This is nutrition periodization. And they kind of just get pushed off to the side, where the focal point for them ends up being the person who purchases all the food and the supplements, and parades it around the facility, and sits in the meal room and has to deal with a lot of that stuff, where you don't need a master's level degree and a lot of experience to be able to do any of that stuff. Like, the higher level thinking comes when you understand the body inside and out, the way that these athletes think, understanding, okay, I know what they're doing in the weight room. I know what they're doing out on the field. I know the demands of it. I know the nutrition that can assist with that, whether it's pre, during, or post, and coming up with those interventions. So I think that's one of the biggest issues, is a lot of these dietitians and nutritionists, just, one, they don't have that experience. And two, when they do get hired on by a team, they don't know what to do to add that extra value. And right now they're learning from these people that have been in their positions for a while. So it's kind of like the blind leading the blind. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of really good ones out there, but for the majority of the field, it's people are getting bogged down dealing with a lot of the procurement, a lot of just the day-to-day logistic stuff, instead of actually just being present in meetings, being on the field, being in the weight room, seeing what's going on, having those conversations with the players to be able to troubleshoot and figure out, like, hey, what's going on? Take the time to figure it out, provide some kind of intervention, and be able to monitor and evaluate it as time passes.
Being the devil's advocate, how much of that do you think is what you just said, or how much of it is because there's not enough of them? Because hearing you talk about how, detailed and involved it is, I was thinking to myself, like, man, one person for 120, football roster doesn't sound fair. If it was one strength coach or one athletic trainer, why is it, fair for one nutritionist to do that? So how much of it is the fact of lack of arms versus lack of knowledge? Just being the devil's advocate.
No, that's a great question. And yeah, I experienced it too, because some days it's like, look, I only have time to talk to 4 players, like pretty intensely. And
yeah, because you got to deal with their class schedule and lifting and practice, right?
And the tough thing is, on the list of importance, it's always going to be at the bottom. So unless they're really motivated and I catch them in a good mindset or frame, or come up with an idea or strategy to get my words across to them that they would be interested in, it's hard changing the mind of a college athlete. It's not just limited to football players or males, it's females too. A lot of it is they just aren't armed with the information. They're not super knowledgeable. And a lot of the studies that have done questionnaires on these populations prove it. And it's not important to them because, they're so talented depending on level that they're playing at, and they can still make gains by doing everything wrong. So it's kind of taking the good and the bad, but yeah, it is difficult to be the person you want to be for, 110 college football players in the league. Until we got the roster cut down, it was 90 up until pretty much the final preseason game.
Yeah.
Have a short window to prioritize, like, okay, who do I need to talk to? And at the same time, I think the catch-22 is, if you're talking about a college program or pro team, the focal point is always going to be on your star players because they're the most important. But at the same time, a lot of these star players, regardless of how much time you spend with them, aren't going to be super compliant. So sometimes you're just spinning your wheels and wasting your time, and understanding that there's dozens of other players on the team that would love your attention, that deserve your attention, that might not be your 5-star or your Pro Bowler or all pro, but they could be a second stringer or a third stringer that are going to play an important role at some point in the season, because not everybody's healthy. We know this. So that's another tough part too. It's an impossible role to fill if you have to do it by yourself. And in some of these roles too, like if it's the department director who has to oversee football, they also have to run a department. They might be in charge of, 2 or 3 other sports because they don't have the full staff to handle 23 sports, if you only have 2 or 3 full-time staff members.
Yeah. And then Lord forbid, if you're the one that has to be, doing the meals for all the teams, like it's not fair to you. One of the things that came to my mind as I was hearing that was one of my former assistants was like, hey, we got to have our nutritionist talk to the guys at a mandatory time every day, because how good would they get at practice or lifting if it was optional, right? Because that's what nutrition essentially is. It's optional. But do you think there will ever come a time, again, you can't predict the future, but based on conversations you've had with people and coworkers, do you see a paradigm shift where possibly head coaches are literally taking the time to carve out to say, hey, we're going to talk about nutrition with this person, with our nutritionist, with our strength staff? Is that the evolution? And if not, how can we as coaches push it forward from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's pushing that way. Fortunate enough to be in positions where coaches definitely saw the value in it. And if I saw something wrong that a lot of the athletes were doing, so we actually did this in the league with Coach Mack and Coach Shermer, and I was like, I need to address these guys. He's like, okay, you've got 2 minutes, which is like 90 seconds. Legit. Like
he's like, all right, fucking stopwatch.
Oh, seriously. Like if you go over, we're going to pull you. And I'm like, all right. Yeah. And it's like, I have to be polarizing. I have to catch their attention, but I also have very concise points to say, this is the general concept of what I want to get across, but I'm also going to be around based on, the data collecting things I see. I'm going to come talk to you guys individually if you don't want to come to me directly. And it's not that I'm going to be pointing the finger. It's like, look, if you're doing something wrong, I'm going to try to help you. I'm not going to let you just do something wrong that you're not aware of, because, a lot of people lack self-awareness. Which is great, because it actually the 90 seconds turned into them asking more questions during that time frame. Not a full 10 minutes, but 2 minutes turns into 5 minutes.
That fucking coach.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking over at the side, and our football ops
got the wrap it up box going for you.
I'm like, you know what are you gonna do? Get mad at me for helping the team? So I'm gonna take my sweet fucking time.
Justin, what were you timing right there? Did he make it under 90 seconds?
He was at 90 in 90.5, so it's bullshit.
So I have to do like 100 yards touchdowns. Is that my punishment?
Yeah, no, we're gonna be like there was an NFL team that somebody sent me a video of them doing up downs.
I saw that. Yeah. To start camp.
Yeah, exactly, man. Hey, that team, they're gonna flip their record this year because they did that. Again, not selling or not giving away any of your information, because I have it myself. I got it. I don't know if anybody can see, I'm 67% of the way through. And I really like unteachable. Yep. One of the things that I really like that you made a really clear point of with that resource is that it's a resource. It's not a course. It's something for you to chew on, to marinate, and to go back to. And one of the things that you talked about in there, and then you've talked about a ton in here, is nutrition periodization. So again, a little bit of a teaser for that source. Again, that resource, plug where it is and how people can get it. But talk just, again, super high level, superficial, not giving away your stuff for free, but how people can do it right.
Yeah. And again, it's kind of looking back at the things I wish I would have done more of, where spending time to just understand, we know what the full calendar year looks like for most sports. If you're working with it, you have an idea of when the off season is, when the competition phases are, what are they actually doing? So getting together with your full staff and talking about, okay, what does the coach want for the team? And what does that mean for all of us? What does that mean for how they're going to be trained in the weight room? What does that mean for when they start with conditioning and speed work and accelerations and change of direction, all that stuff? And understanding what is the desired adaptation we're trying to get from that, and then working backwards, because again, they have to have some type of stimulus to drive an adaptation. And if their bodies have the appropriate nutrition in it, then we're going to be able to take advantage of building their bodies up the way that we need to. So in the off season, it's the greatest time to really gain a good focus on increasing strength, changing body composition. So their energy demands, we know, aren't insane compared to what competitive phases bring. But a lot of these players don't know this. They don't get it. They think like, oh, I don't need to eat a certain way because we're not lifting today. For some reason, they have it in their mind that nutrition only becomes important when they step in the weight room, because they think of nutrition as ways to just change their body as opposed to ways to facilitate and help them get through training and help them recover from training. So going through from a macro perspective down to a very, very smaller micro perspective, looking at how the training block looks over the course of multiple months, down to a month, down to weeks, down to days, and saying like, okay, when are they training? What is it that they need before and after in terms of the general scope of things? Now you want to individualize it for different players based on, are they trying to get stronger? Are they trying to lean out? Are they trying to put on muscle mass? How much that is, but that can come a little bit later. But when you start with this general wide view and then get closer and closer, it makes things a lot easier. And explaining that to the players is also really important too, because you have guys rolling out of bed, you know, if they have an early morning lift or early morning training session, then so be it. They can't do anything about it. But they're dehydrated, they haven't eaten, they probably got shit sleep. And now they're going through these training sessions where, yeah, they're going to be stronger because that's just who they are. They're physical freaks. Like I've had athletes that have legit eaten pizza, ice cream, and drank all the time and have dropped body fat, have put on muscle mass and gotten stronger. You know, but not everybody's going to be a genetic outlier like that. Some need just a lot more help. So nutrition periodization is just matching the nutrition needs for those players as a whole based on what those energy demands are, and then making sure that everything is available for them before, during, and after, and then providing the education for what you can't provide them, which nowadays for some teams is not a whole lot. You can give them but that's not the case for every team.
Yeah, unfortunately for us, and I'm just gonna take the liberty to include us all in the same bag. When you're like a big picture person, and you know that you can swim in and out, and you trust in the process. When you're not one of those, either rightfully or wrongfully, it's hard to believe or understand something that doesn't have an immediate or an acute impact. Think about training, you know, like players go in, something felt heavy, I lifted it, that means I'm stronger. So they don't think about recovering. They see like, oh, I eat and I train. They don't see the you know, the week or the requirements. You know, they think a good meal will give them abs, a bad meal or a beer will give them, you know, a belly or body fat or whatever. But that's just, I think, is beyond our scope, because it's just like society thing or a world thing right now where something being immediate or completely perceptive or acute is what buys in. So that's what we fight against. The whatever it is right here, right now that I can perceive versus what I'll notice in a year's time if I sleep 2 extra hours every day.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because that instant gratification is what everybody wants. And as you said, if a player has a really good day in the weight room, you know, whether they increase the load that they moved or they just feel better coming out of the weight room, they're like, oh, hey, lifting is awesome, or our strength coach is the best in the nation, regardless. You know, if something hurts, like, hey, I slept wrong, my ankle hurts, my knee hurts, I'm going to go get treatment from the trainers. You know, they do their assessment, provide some assistance depending on the severity of it, you know, help them out. Oh, I feel so much better. But from a nutritional standpoint, based on their habits, you know, they're just used to what they're used to. So they might be doing everything wrong. They might be super inflamed, running on fumes, but that's what they're used to. Or somebody who's doing something moderately right and has, you know, deficiency in a couple different areas, and you know that it's going to take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months to get them to the levels that they would need to be with consistent, you know, supplementation, with consistent, you know, habits. They're not going to feel that off the bat. So that's one of the toughest things when dealing with nutrition is, you know, they ate a bad meal the night before, or, you know, not as healthy meal. Maybe it was a full pizza, or maybe it was just, you know, 2 plates of wings. They came in, they crushed their lift. And then you tell them like, well, that's probably not ideal. Try this instead. Well, they come in the next day, they crush their lift. It's the same thing. So they're like, well, what's the benefit when I get the pleasure out of this and I still get the same outcome? So it's tough having them think about it longitudinally instead of just always being right there in the moment, because they want that instant gratification.
Yeah. Plus for us wanting to, you know, set a solid foundation in which you give them tools for them to understand and interpret. biologically and mentally, we're going to be looking for easy fixes all the time. And then someone like us takes the time, the education, the evidence, and then you go on Instagram and you get like, all the easy solutions and the whatnot and the non-science. So you get like this small window of opportunity, like you just said, to make a change, but you fight against all these others, like even other professionals, like giving bad advice or ill advice or unsupported advice about, oh, you should do this. Like, had a couple of guys in the team who tend to be like a bit of hypochondriacs. And you spend 2 or 3 years talking about being robust, like doing the simple things consistently every single year. And then you leave and someone comes in and gives them like, the colored tape or the insoles for the shoes or like cracking their back. And even if they did okay with you, automatically it's safer and it's more gratifying to get this fantasy explanation that will solve everything, because it's just easy for you to understand than just doing all the work and being consistent and doing things where you just need like this willpower because you don't want to do the right thing. It's easier to just get a tape around your hamstring rather than just, do the RDLs and walk like a cowboy the next day.
Yeah.
I'm assuming cowboys walk funny, not because RDLs.
I mean, when you do zoom in on the micro, how do you get through to the athletes to put something in their body, whether it's the immediate before they train or, okay, hey, you got to train early in the morning, but we got to put something in your body, before that, the night before, but making sure it's not too big so it's interrupting with your sleep. Like, how have you handled those conversations with athletes that have things like that?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, you have to understand the science behind it. Why should athletes be consuming carbohydrates and protein and drinking fluid with electrolytes prior to training? Now, depending on what the training is, like if it's a lift and it isn't anything over the top or intense, then yeah, you're not going to freak out if they don't eat anything before. But if it's a practice, 11 a.m. practice, they ate sparingly at 7 a.m. and they're supposed to be out on the field, in 100-degree conditions for 2 hours. Like, that's just not going to fly. So I think part of it is understanding what the science says and what we know about physiology and training. And the second is, depending on how you're perceived in your role, I think this is another big thing too, where some teams will check a box, say, hey, we have a nutritionist, there, so-and-so is there. But if you have a team that really builds up those people in those positions to say, hey, if you have any questions about nutrition, supplementation, like, this is your go-to, they're going to be there for you. And if they come around and they start making suggestions, it's for your benefit because they have a great track record or we've had a lot of success. And if it's coming from the head coach, the strength coach, the people that are the key stakeholders and the leaders in an organization or a team, that adds a lot of value to where you don't have to break your back chasing a lot of these players and getting them to do or proving yourself that you are valuable for them. The other part of it too is understanding, like, how are you picking and choosing these conversations, who you're having them with, and what the words that are saying, like, how are your words getting across to them? Instead of like, oh, you have to eat this. It's like, well, no, I understand you had, you were low on energy yesterday, take me through it. Oh, I've identified you haven't been eating before lifts. So, I have a solution for you to help you get through these lifts to make you feel more energetic. And that way coaches aren't going to be on you for looking lethargic, because again, that's what they fixate on instead of what's the problem going on behind the scenes. Like, oh, he's having trouble, his dad's sick or his grandma's sick and he's not sleeping very well. That's the cause of his stress and his low energy. So I think part of it is understanding, like, you have to have the IQ, but you also need to have the EQ to go along with that, and developing those relationships by being authentic and consistent. So they know that, hey, you're not just a guy who's going to yell at them when they do something wrong. It's like, well, if I come over to talk to you, it's because I have some valuable information for you that's going to help you. And I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it, which is using my personality and my communication style, and having that support from the coaches to say, hey, he's one of the smartest people in the building. Like, if he's telling you to do something, yeah, it's going to be really important. So I think trying to leverage all of that as much as possible is how I've had success doing that. Now, it's not the only way to do it, but I think it definitely can work in a variety of different situations.
You mentioned it earlier at the beginning when you talked about being at the Giants, and I remember the tweet that you sent essentially saying that you were coming home. What was that moment like for you as a coach, kind of stepping out of it? And, you alluded to, it being, not rough, but like, hey, financially it wasn't the best for a while, but then you were able to obviously figure it out. To advice to any coaches out there that are maybe going through something similar, like, man, I got to get my life back on track. You know, now that you can again step back and see everything 2020 with the glasses, because it's already done, what would be a piece of advice to any of our members and listeners out there?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, make sure you have a plan in place. Like you have something to fall back on, whether it's a side hustle or some other opportunity to help you out financially. I had some ideas and things lined up, but because of COVID, it was still in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Things just didn't go the direction that I was hoping with what I had set up. And, you know, obviously I'm not disappointed because I understand that the circumstances in September of 2020 weren't great all around the world. I think that's step one of just making sure that you financially can take care of yourself, and it's not going to be something that's going to be a massive burden or provide you with a lot of anxiety, which for me, it was just unknown of, all right, well, you know, am I going to have enough clients this month to just be able to take care of myself? You know, made some bad investments that didn't go my way, which is, you know, I take full responsibility for that. But I think that's definitely step one. Step two is give yourself a little bit of time to just like take a breath, like evaluate, reassess everything that's going on in your life, because the things that you held really important, the things that meant a lot to you, that really gave you joy, might not be the same thing anymore. For me, I loved getting up as I was continuing to progress in my career, because every position was different and unique. And I was continuing to grow, not only as a practitioner and coach, but also as a person, until you get to a point where things are plateauing. And I think I kind of hit that after the 2019 season. And then when Aaron left, it kind of changed the entire dynamic of like, okay, I'm going to give this a go, see what it's going to be like. But seeing the writing on the wall of what that new coaching staff wanted to implement, I'm like, this probably isn't going to turn out very well. And now those sacrifices, I don't want to call them sacrifices, the choices I made to work 12 to 16-hour days away from family and friends, like it wasn't worth it anymore, because I just wasn't happy and I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. So after I posted that, I actually got a lot of really positive comments and messages from a variety of different people, whether they had been in sports before, whether it was like a position coach, head coach role, or another coach, or other people that were in other industries, you know, business and finance and nonprofits and things of that nature. Like they had been in a similar situation and taken the step back to just try to transition into something different and really figure out, okay, is it about the work? Is it the title? Is it the money? What means the most to me, and what can I be satisfied with for the rest of my life by just thinking or even writing out, like, what is important to me now? And what is it that I want to achieve outside of wins and losses and trophies and all that? Which is a funny story, because I think I lost all my rings that I had. Yeah, between Jersey to Texas to Kansas, they are somewhere and they are not here with me. So
whoever has them, hopefully you're enjoying them.
There it might be
them.
it might be with my mom, but I already cleaned out all the stuff that I had sent to them and brought them with me here to Kansas. I would say if the advice you give to the people around you would be to get out of a situation like that, but you're living it, then it's probably worthwhile to assess it and take your own advice. So that's what I ended up doing. Because I've had other, you know, former interns, former staff members, other people that have come to me to say, hey, like, I'm just not happy with what I'm doing. And automatically when we think about is, well, why are you keeping yourself in that situation? You know, you don't want to do something just for the sake of doing it if it's making you unhappy. So
I don't think, like, I think there's two groups of people: are the ones that stay, the ones that actually enjoy it. I mean, maybe if we've changed, I think we're like-minded in whatever you say, and we've had a lot of people on the podcast thinking and saying alike. There's ones, let's call it half, that actually do enjoy the grind and live the part, and you know, they're happy that way, so be it. And then I think it's the other half that don't quit, that sort of feel and think like we do, but have this victim mentality ingrained, like they don't deserve any better, so like, you know, it's too late for me, just go save yourself. And but they actually stay because they maybe get their worth from the job title, or they become like one person with the job or with the title, that if they leave that, they're too scared to find out what's on the other side. So it's better to know something and be familiar with something that you don't like than take the risk. For me personally, when you were talking right there, I felt the empathy, because at some point what I felt is that I changed. So the same thing was just didn't cut it anymore. And I think we've said it a couple of times with master interviewer there, Justin, is like, the phrase has been repeated here is, no man crosses the same river twice. Some people just don't cross the river, but for others, it's just like, and it's not that you resent what you did before. Like you said, the sacrifices, it was just part of the journey. Like sometimes you want something different. Some people need new challenges, and they come in different forms, or you just don't get that adrenaline from the wins and losses anymore. You look for something else. I mean, and that's personalities, and that's ambition, and
Hell, a lot of coaches have that happen once they have kids, right? Like that kind of flips the switch, because kind of like what both you guys were saying, like, Teak, you talking, hey, like it's part of you and you enjoy it and you like it, and then it is that, but then all of a sudden you do grow. It goes back to the 4 Ps that we've talked about, right? Like your purpose, and you're like, well, wait a minute, like I'm now a part of something bigger, not just this team, but to a wife and to kids, and okay, now I want to spend some time with them. And again, it's not a bad thing, but it's just part of that progression and evolution.
Yeah, or even like you reshuffle. Like I took a year from coaching, and I'm coming back to it tomorrow, and it may be a similar context, but I'm a different person, so the rules are different. Like even the way you present yourself, or where you draw the lines, or what you do is different. So it's not necessarily that the context might be the issue, or a particular team or organization might be the issue. Sometimes you just find your place within. Like it's not that we have to quit sport because everyone is in one way. So, I mean, you learn your lessons, you go back and you be like, I'll do it differently now. And it's still the thrill of the wins and losses, but now it's not like live or die by it. It's just something that you go for, or, you're sorry, and just you wake up the next day, like you dust off and be like, hey, we lost, before it would be a week of wallowing. Now it's just like, yeah, we'll go again. Like,
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right there on the head, where I enjoyed the grind. I embraced it. It's unique. Not everybody can do it from a mental and physical standpoint.
Fucking right, you signed to that board.
I love being miserable. Like honestly, I love being poor and miserable and like not seeing my family. I don't actually like them that much. I need a high demanding job. No, I'm joking.
I mean, if you're an introverted person, it's like the perfect thing to do. So for me, it was like, oh, this is perfect for me. This geared toward my personality. I'm in my late 30s now. I'm not going out clubbing and partying, so the social aspect of a lot of that stuff doesn't really mean that much to me. And I think once you get to a point, though, I think a lot of people understand this, where if the job isn't fulfilling to you and you feel like you don't have any control. So the control aspect for me was huge, to where I wasn't important enough to influence wins and losses, but I didn't have the opportunity to go interview at another team because I was already under contract and I had an extension in hand that I didn't sign. So even if there was a situation that was going to be better for me, they were likely not going to let me go, because we never really sat down and had these conversations. Like a lot of these teams don't operate the way they should. They should operate like businesses, but they're not. Every football team would benefit highly by following a protocol from a very, very well-run business, but they really aren't. So when I didn't have that control over my own life, it's like, well, I don't even have control over what my job description is anymore, because it's been changed, because we have another head coach, the 4th and 5th year, 5 years. And I have to start from scratch all over again, even though the organization and the players know my importance. It doesn't matter, because I'm at the mercy of what the new staff thinks of me. So I have to do exactly what they want. So that means, when off season comes, I'm still guarding the desk, because if the head coach or somebody asks for something, then I have to run upstairs and get it done, whether they want reports or what have you. And then it got to that point where it's like my contributions to the team are so minimal of what my role ended up becoming, that like not having that control or freedom, it was horrible, to tell you the truth. But making that decision to step away, looking back at it, was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made, because even now, having that self-reflection time to really be critical about everything I did over the past 10 to 11 years, and just say like, yeah, you were shit. This was good. This was good. Shouldn't have done that. Every single year, just replaying everything over and over in my head, and then talking to a lot of the players that I had a chance to work with and coach, and just gaining their perspective. Like, hey, what was good? What was not good? What do you think I should have done differently? What would you want to have done differently? what things would you want coaches to know? How would you do things differently? I think that was valuable to allow me to step away from that narrow-sighted mind of our coach focus. We're only focused on our team, what's in front of us, as opposed to there's a whole large world out there that we can learn about and implement these nuggets of knowledge to help ourselves get better, help our teams get better, help the people that we work with. I'm an exponentially better coach practitioner than I was when I left in 2020.
I think that's a great place to end it. I guess the last question I'd say, looking back at all those helmets, who is in your top list of like the freakiest people that you've ever worked with? Again,
And
you
did they
can
have
pick...
really, really tiny heads, or is it just like and that's my foreign joke.
Man, all right. At Michigan State, like Tywan Jones, he was a middle linebacker. He played for the Jets for a little bit. Lawrence Thomas, he played in the league. Le'Veon Bell, freaks in nature. Will Golston, just specimens. I'm probably missing a few, but I'm thinking more of like the largest, the fastest players at Oregon. Royce Freeman, like when he came in as an 18-year-old freshman, 230 pounds, single-digit body fat, unit. DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead, massive dudes. Like Farrell Brown, big tight end, just size for days. We just had very, very athletic and speedy skill players. Like Devin Allen, who's now with the Eagles, just like you look at him, you don't think he's much, but on the field, like you're like, this kid can fly.
Yeah.
Justin Herbert, when he came in, he was just this tiny, tiny freshman, woke him up a little bit. And then he just became this freak of nature, chuck the ball as far as he wants to. And then in the league, most of these guys are already freaks. Like Odell is just his movement ability, his body.
You're the second guy that we've had on that said that. Remember Pete Fernando? He said the same thing about him. Because Pete, were you with Pete at New York at the same time?
He was a year before.
Yeah, he said the same thing about Odell just being ridiculous.
Just the way
he must be really good, because I even know who he is. So. He transcends like.
That's another foreign joke right there, Fernando.
The guy that catches, second foreign joke. That's a bonus, people. That's the guy that catches with one hand reverse.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
He went to the Browns.
He did, and then he just won the Super Bowl with the Rams.
Yeah. He's a free agent, probably going to be signing once his rehab and stuff is prolonged a little bit further. Saquon, of course. I mean,
yeah, I saw Saquon in college, and he was one of the most impressive people I've ever seen too. Like the fact he did a move on two guys that are now in the NFL still. He had the sideline here and here. He juked and he like everybody would think he's gonna go this way, but he still used the sideline and got like he's ridiculous.
Yeah, JPP, he's a freak of nature. Just incredible physical talent. Nate Solder, the tallest, most impressive specimen at lineman I've seen in person that I've had the chance to work with. There's a lot, but just fortunate enough to have a chance to work with a lot of really good players, but also good men too.
Great, man. Appreciate you taking the time. For anybody that is stuck around, where's the best place to follow you on your social? Because you put out a ton of great content, and where to get that resource that we talked about. Yeah,
so feel free, please follow me on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is @PratikXPatel, and in both of my Linktree bios, there's a link to the Nutrition for Football resource. I mean, this time of year, most teams are already, headfirst into training camp, but like the way I wanted it to be is not just a course. It's like, look, if I was going to create a book about this, then it could be something that you could reference whoever, trainers, strength coaches, nutritionists, dietitians. So if you want a discount code for me, DM me and I will give you one.
Yeah. And I couldn't further endorse it more. It's fantastic. It's also, and your stuff in fundamentals too is also fantastic. So again, another plug out there, but if people want to continue their growth with nutrition, the guy's done a great job. So go ahead and give him a follow. Again, thank you for the time, and appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.